Hi, welcome back to Cinora. I'm Ash and I'm going to be talking about the Traitors today, the social deduction game that has taken over our TV screens but has also got itself into a bit of controversy this week. I'm going to be exploring the difficulty of the show as a format, and I'm also going to be exploring why it's been upsetting people in the Scottish screen industry. Is the Traitors problematic, and why has it become a political talking point? The Traitors is a competition show that sprung onto our TVs a few years ago. It's based on social deduction games like Mafia, Werewolf and Avalon, so you may have played something like this before. The BBC actually took a stab at this before, and in the noughties had a very similar show to the Traitors we see today, except the entire thing took place in 1 hour and it was sort of just one long round table where people bicker and argue. The show as we know it now takes place over 2 weeks, but each episode is 1 day in the Traitors' castle. It was originally made by a Dutch production company and it has been bought by other territories, which is how we have the Traitors UK, as well as Australia, Canada, the US, New Zealand, and many others. And just to be clear, I really enjoy watching the Traitors. I didn't expect to enjoy it so much, but I also think that you should be able to critique the things that you love. I think what's very captivating about the Traitors is that it allows you to see a dynamic of clear villains and heroes, traitors and faithfuls. We all feel like we have this built into our lives, but you never get to see someone behave in a way that is purposefully evil or to betray people that they know around them. And I think that as humans, we're quite fascinated at watching this and exploring those behaviours and that psychology play out with a group. Even if you feel like you have heroes and villains in your life, you never really get to find out someone's motivations or plans so brazenly. And that's why I think The Traitors is as successful as it is. I never quite know what's going to happen, but I'm finding it very interesting to watch along the way how people lie to each other and how it can come so easily and naturally to people. And I think that this is why people enjoy it so much, and it's also a bit of a flaw going forward season on season for the show. As early as season 2, the contestants were referencing that they had picked up on behaviours from the previous season or actions, and they were now anticipating coming up against that in the show. Big personalities and strong moves tend to be banished early in the show or killed by the Traitors, which means the people who make it the furthest are the less active. I'm not saying that anybody who's made it to the end of the show is inherently dull or boring. That is not what I'm trying to say. But you will get far if you don't ruffle any feathers. And that's not really a producer's dream when it comes to TV. They would prefer big personalities and they would prefer a lot of drama. Something I've observed is that neurodivergent people tend to be picked on very early. There's a lot of discussion of people's behaviours not fitting with the rest of the group, people being loud then quiet. And I watch this and I think about how I, as a neurodivergent person, find it quite overwhelming coming into a big group of personalities and figuring out how to manage those. And then also I get burnout. So if I'm in extended social situations, I tend to get a bit quieter as time goes on because I just don't have the same energy that I did when I first came to the group. I would be voted out so early, and it is entirely on neurodivergency and not because I was doing anything deceitful. On this wavelength, sometimes the contestants can be really nasty to each other. Obviously, they have to observe behaviours, but sometimes they end up picking on each other's personalities, and that is a bit touchy for me. All of these types of shows have a responsibility and a duty of care for their participants. It came up a lot when I used to watch RuPaul's Drag Race, and you can see a huge shift in the course of that show where, not in the very early seasons, but the mid-seasons, there was so much fighting and it was very vicious and it was very personal. And it was great for television, but it was so detrimental to the people involved. It really stayed with them and it tarnished their reputation. They had people bullying them online for something that they said on the show that was in the heat of the moment and really shouldn't have been shared throughout the world. And now, when you watch RuPaul's Drag Race, you can see that a lot of that has been mitigated. There is far more management of conflict and aggression. Now, the Traitors definitely hasn't got to those levels, and I don't think it will, because I do think the BBC take responsibility for looking after contestants in competitions. But there is a part of it where you have to pick apart someone's character, and if you are a traitor and you've gone on the show and you've found that you are able to lie to people quite freely, that you're displaying manipulative behaviour, or that you come across very cold and calculated, that may go with you outside the show and into real life. And I feel that people who have portrayed themselves as a very cunning traitor may end up being quite mistrusted in real life. Another production issue is that they have to have traitors at all times in the show, otherwise there's nothing to watch. And of course, the group of faithfuls will banish traitors whenever they find one, and that's kind of what you want too, because you want the team to be motivated and celebrate a win of getting rid of a traitor. It's good drama. But as the traitors dwindle, you have to put some new ones in there. And the problem that I've observed with the show is that nobody enjoys being recruited to the traitors. Most people go reluctantly because they think if they don't, then they'll die. But what tends to happen is that there's a huge dynamic shift within the traitors when somebody else joins, and the betrayal is far easier to follow through on. I'm not going to spoil it, but I just think that there is a problem with that element of the traitors. So as a show, it's messy, but it gets even worse when you look behind the scenes.
Where I really see it is when people who work in high-end TV and film in Scotland talk to me about the fact that, you know, they'll be on, like, say, one show for 6-7 years, but they'll stay at the same position. You know, or their head of department will always be sourced from, like, London, because there's something about Scottish crews that aren't trusted to lead the department or whatever.
Last year, as the fame of the Traitors grew and grew, everyone in the Scottish industry was talking about how few Scottish people actually worked on the show. Since the show utilises an old Scottish castle, it's set here and it brings in Scottish culture and heritage into the challenges and the set, it would be good if there was a strong Scottish crew behind it. Recently, a post on LinkedIn by documentary filmmaker Peter Strachan went viral when he revealed that only 6% of the production roles on a very big team were filled by people based in Scotland, and 81% were filled by people based in London. And this is not a surprise to anyone. Scotland has been used as a location for a lot of different films and TV shows over the last 10 years, and typically companies will bring their own crew to Scotland. This is particularly upsetting in the case of the Traitors, because the money used to make that show comes from the BBC's Scottish production allocation, and also public money. This is a fund that is allocated to Scottish productions. Now, the BBC doesn't actually make the Traitors itself. It commissions the Traitors. The Traitors is created by Studio Lambert. But the BBC is obliged to commission and create shows that are outside of London. And I believe the quota for that is 8% of their programming should be from outside of London. And this is to fairly represent the UK. Although I would argue that 8%, given the overall population of the UK, is quite low. To access the funds meant for regional programming, as it's called, you must meet 2 of 3 criteria. Having a substantive base in the region, investing 70% of production spend outside the English capital, and having at least 50% of the off-screen talent based outside of London. So the accusation is that the Traitors does not meet this criteria, but it does use the money allocated for Scotland, and this is why people are so upset. My cat has just started playing with a toy, so there's going to be crinkling in the background now. Late last year, Screen Scotland released a report on broadcaster commissioning in Scotland and found that 80% of the total episodes made by the top 15 production companies for the BBC were commissioned from producers headquartered in London. So it's part of a bigger problem that has been identified by a few different sources. Peter Strachan's comments were picked up by the media and have been making a splash. And so Screen Scotland joined the conversation to say that they are actively engaging with the BBC and Studio Lambert regarding the Traitors, but that they are generally supportive of the positive portrayal of Scotland in the Traitors. Then a BBC director tried to shut all of this down by saying that what they consider a Scottish production is broader than what Screen Scotland says is a Scottish production, and said that Screen Scotland's data was viewed through a prism. Funnily enough, that's how cameras traditionally worked, by looking through a prism. Screen Scotland then replied with, "That prism was Ofcom's Made Out of London register, and the episodes the BBC had opted to say were Scottish qualifying in that register." Almost to say that the BBC have acknowledged that they are not actually working with the criteria that they are obliged to. I work with the BBC a lot, and I'm definitely not here to be like, gotcha! But I think that they are not approaching the subject in the best of ways. So now, Scotland's Culture Secretary has said that he will meet with the BBC and Ofcom about this issue. Never underestimate the power of a LinkedIn post. Now, I haven't started watching Season 3 UK Traitors yet, but I have read online, and this is not a big spoiler, but one of the contestants is pretending to have a Welsh accent because she thinks it makes her seem more trustworthy. This calls back to what we were talking about earlier, where the contestants are learning things from previous seasons and bringing that into their game plan. But it's also ironic that a contestant is pretending to not be from London, because you could liken that to what's happening with Studio Lambert pretending to not be predominantly based in London. I like to be very diplomatic about things in general, and I know that what we're talking about now is not representative of everybody who works on Traitors, everybody who works at Studio Lambert, the BBC, anyone involved in this entire scandal. There are always weak spots in any system, and there are always opportunists that will exploit those weak spots. There may even be a genuine misunderstanding about the parameters in which you can use the Scottish allocated BBC funding. But I think that if we don't talk about it openly, then we are very unlikely to find a solution to the problem. So I'm going to be talking about the relationship within the screen industry between London and the rest of the UK. So if you put it this way, if I wanted to build muscle all over my body and I decided to start lifting weights, it would be silly of me to only lift weights with one arm. This arm would get extremely powerful, my other arm wouldn't, and the rest of my body would just remain the same. I would only build muscle power in one area. If all of the funding and opportunity for the arts is concentrated in London, then the rest of the UK is not going to grow. And it's for this reason that there are systems in place to make sure that there is commissioning and there are opportunities outside of the capital. There's still a very big imbalance between how much is given to places outside of the capital. And I understand that it's all about availability, it's all about resources. When things are closer together, much like in Hollywood in the US, it's far easier for things to be done. Productions can share people, they can share resources, you can rent something, and if you're all in that same space together, it's really easy. Whereas if you're spread out, it's more difficult. But that is not a reason to neglect these other areas of the UK. But to bring it back to the Traitors, the reason I think that this particular issue has happened is because there is a culture of competitive survival in the UK screen industry. It feels like every production company has to scrape and battle in order to get commissions and survive year on year. Last year, I covered that a lot of UK production companies, some that had been running for decades and had been making programmes that were huge successes on television, closed down because the industry has gone through a really rough patch over the last few years, and there just isn't the same money there that there used to be. I feel like the nature of this has put not just individuals in a position where they have to think about how am I going to keep the roof over my head, but it's also putting companies in that position, and it's putting people in a place where they know their responsibility is to take care of their employees and to keep everything they've built going. And so people are doing whatever they can in order to survive. It is not the right thing to do to take funds from a place that you shouldn't. I'm just saying that I understand that that's probably why this happens. Now, we live in a world where people are constantly engaging with media. Most people watch television every night, and they may even be watching something else on their phone at the same time. We've actually got to a stage where people are watching two things at the same time. And yet somehow we still aren't able to create enough jobs around that medium. There is constant demand for things to see. And I think that moving forward, strategies and models should be looking at how to create sustainability within the industry. I think there should be a big focus on sustainability for individuals and for companies. We should be looking at how we meet the demands of the audiences and how we make sure that our production industry is preserved. And further to that, growing. And I think that checking that you adhere to the rules and conditions of a fund, whether you are receiving it or whether you are giving it, is also essential. So I know a couple of people who worked on the Traitors, and they are Scottish, and it must be really surreal to be in their shoes right now. But I know that there are some good people that work on that production, and certainly nobody was at the set thinking, oh my God, I'm so glad that we duped Scotland into letting us do this. But it will be very interesting to see what comes of the further discussions that are planned around this issue and what this may trigger within the Scottish industry, looking at other productions and other ways in which people come and use Scotland as a location, but don't necessarily strengthen the industry or give anything back. We do genuinely love it when big film sets come and use Glasgow or Edinburgh or the Highlands or whatever they want to use. You'll find that some Scottish people do get the opportunity to get involved, and I think there's an opportunity to get the ball rolling there and allow that to strengthen the industry. We're not looking to cut things off. We just want to make sure that there's enough here for us as well. Thank you for watching today. I would be really interested to know your thoughts on this topic. I try to stay quite impartial and just deliver the facts with a bit of my opinion. And like I said, I like to be diplomatic, but I'd love to hear what you guys think and if I've missed anything in this conversation that you think is essential.